Good everything. Hello.
Good everything. Good everything. Good
Hi.
everything. Hi, the great Gil Sky Heron. Who will pay reparations on my soul? Who's going to do that? No, well, is that even a question, huh? Is that a
So,
question?
so you wanted to play this. You've spent a lot of time in this space, well, your whole career, but in particular this past week. But how do we how do we navigate the future when our current present danger is so right here? Israel striking Iran, saying that America is not involved is like
No,
so
no,
sad.
America's not involved. I mean, unless you count the bombs and the planes and the intelligence and the radar system I guess, would that count? I don't know. I'm not sure. Of course, little Marco's a liar, so I mean, it doesn't really matter
Correct.
what it is.
The
Uh,
fact that Marco Rubio is Secretary of State just gives me so much discomfort. It's like we
does
are,
it?
yeah, because we're so not serious. We have like the most unserious people in the most important positions, from the CDC, the health department, education to, you know, international affairs, homeland security, at every turn, the office of the president. It's like,
Yeah. Yeah. I
it's
mean,
so
it,
wild.
it's we as a polity, but that's where I draw the line. There's no we otherwise. I
Right.
mean,
Well, but we're
Marco,
here. So the bombs aren't going to say, hey, these people over here who've been fighting for their whole lives, let's, guide away from, like, they're not going to make the distinction no more so than Hiroshima and Nagasaki, those folk who are making breakfast for their children, they like get ready
no,
to school. Like, there was no distinction made.
no, for the people harmed, no. Um, and if we embrace that fully, that becomes a good thing. We should make no distinction. The artificial lines that separate what we call countries, the flags, the symbols, we should make no distinction. So every person killed in Iran is us. Every person who bombed is us. I think that would certainly be Martin Luther King's position. It's certainly Reverend Barber's position. Um, Now, but if we're going to make distinctions, then it becomes more complicated. I mean, they don't have the muscle to stop the millions who will be uh, participating in the No More Kings. Now, they want to create the illusion that they do, which is why Nome and her crew would invade Los Angeles. But they don't have the muscle because if you start drawing lines, then you can have people think that they should respect those lines. And what they are finding out now this weekend and in the wake of the No More Kings protests is that you are doing a very good job of redrawing the lines. Except it's not, we won't redraw lines by nation, by country. We're going to redraw lines by who's for our common humanity, who's against it. And I think what they'll find is very quickly is that now that they've caught the car, they've forced us into a consciousness that typically comes in the wake of more harsh attempts to oppress. So again, I keep saying it. I've been saying this now for a long time, certainly since November. I'm excited because now you finally gonna keep pressing us until we finally see where we are. And at that point, you're not gonna be happy. You've been living under an illusion, and we've allowed you to live under it because it allowed us to have a little bit of nominate peace. The only red, white, and blue that you'll see me in connected with a flag is the one I got on right here. You see, my Juneteenth. But this is from Actively Black, right? The good brothers and sisters at Actively Black, they did a Juneteenth drop. And this is the flag they did with Ben Haith, the brother who, talked about Haith many times. And we'll all be in Galveston this time next week. And, but the red and white and blue here, Haith would say represents the United States and its possibilities. The star for Texas, but for all the states of the Union, right? The explosion being the kind of supernova effect of our liberation struggle, the line that separates the red and the blue, which you'll sometimes see in an arc representing the horizon, facing the rising sun of our new day begun. All very beautiful symbols of Juneteenth. I prefer red, white. I prefer red, black, and green To me, that's the symbol of self-determination of African people. You won't ever see me in an American flag, and I don't care if you switch out the red, white, and blue of the American flag with the red, black, and green, following the Black Arts Movement gesture to doing that, the original gesture of doing that. I respect it. I acknowledge it as a moment of cultural meaning making. I will not participate in any reformation of the American separate state, stars and stripes, but I respect people and I understand why. And I understand why Ben Hayes would design this. And I understand why Actively Black would partner exclusively with them to make the shirts and the hoodies. And so, I'm supporting Black businesses. I'll do that. And I also understand that Stephen Miller and Donald Trump and doggone Christy Nome and little Marco, who thinks somehow he can beg his way into the American Settler Project, are very uncomfortable when they see people like us with the red, white, and blue on in any formation. I understand all of that as social structure formations. I also understand that we can overflow the possibilities of the American state by renegotiating the terms of the state. I also understand that in doing that, there's going to be some bumps. When Gil Scott Heron sings there in Who Paid Reparations for My Soul, when he starts with the social structure, many suggestions and documents written, many directions for the end that was given. They gave us pieces of silver, pieces of gold, but who will pay reparations on my soul? The first thing people hearing that might say is they didn't give us silver and gold. No, they didn't. And as I had the conversation, and let me acknowledge out of generosity, respect, the many folks who are part of the self-described, as they describe themselves, on Tuesday. And, we were all gathered at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture at 135th and Malcolm X in Harlem. Happy birthday, Schomburg. Turns 100 this weekend, festivals all day Saturday. But let me acknowledge those folks who describe themselves as freedmen, as descendants of slavery, who I refer to often as descendants of slaves, because I think it's a mentality. But let me acknowledge them, respect them, even as they intervene to disrupt my written remarks. And I started smiling. I think the commissioners and the folks at the Schomburg were much more irritated than I was. I wasn't irritated at all. In fact, I said, as they were saying, hold on, I was like, no, I'm here for all the smoke. It's baby smoke. I said it from the recording is there. Some of y'all dropped that in there. Anyway, I'm not irritated by it. Afterwards, we talked for 30 minutes outside the Schomburg. I know these people. These are African people. I got a problem talking with y'all. But anyway, why you go?
No, I was explain to everyone where you were
Oh,
and
yeah, of course.
what speech you were giving. And, this morning a brother called up.
Oh, yes. I apologize. I lapsed back into that classroom mode. We did talk a
I
lot.
said, man, okay,
I'm gonna get.
please let him go, please.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
but
They say he's a troll when he calls out of time. I didn't know that.
okay,
So
but it was nice because he was stuck, like he was so stuck in his ideal, in the way in which he has been thinking about the world, that is born in trauma of his dad and his mom and all of the horrible things that happened in his childhood, and he's carrying that into this fight. And we
yeah,
do need whole people. We need y'all to get healthy. We need y'all to get okay mentally. We can't we it's a distraction that doesn't allow for us to really galvanize. And if you ain't ready, tap out for a minute and go get some help. That's my message. Please go get some help. But
yeah,
your generosity of spirit of talking with him and the folk, we need to, because they've been bamboozled and hoodwinked into believing like there's a thread of truth in it. So they're holding on to it. We both are descendants of Africans who were brought here, right?
that's right.
We're also descendants of Africans,
Exactly.
and Africans were here even before the Africans were brought here. If we're going to have that conversation, Africans were everywhere. They were everywhere. Okay. So, like, what's the fight right now? And I get it. I was talking this week about Haiti paying reparations until the 1930s,
Well, I mean, yeah, in one form, but in
37,
other forms to this day.
to this day, right?
Yeah,
Having to pay France every year half of its wealth every year for the audacity to be free. And we know that the enslavers here were given reparations after slavery was abolished. They were given reparations. So it's like, yeah, this is going to be a fight everywhere we breathe. And everybody should. And Malcolm understood that. It was taking it to the UN, and then you know, Kwame Nkrumah and Lumumba. Like that was the problem.
That's right.
That was the problem. These people are coming together. And what's happening in Africa right now, shout out to Otis Moss. I heard Larry play a clip that I happened to watch this morning of Otis Moss III, Reverend Doctor, talking about Traore and the entire region coming together and rejecting everything from skin bleaching to how they show up in court, which makes sense.
Take the wigs off. That's right.
Right. So the question is, if we can be one, that's how we WON. That's how we WIN, right?
Yes. Come on now. Yes.
So that's
carry the one. Ooh, that's nice.
Carry the one.
Carry the one. Carry the one. That's that's beautiful. No, you said it. That's the solution. And that is the thing that terrifies this arrangement, this social structure, because it was never stable. It reached its peak, and I'm talking about what we would call the modern world order, which is really the Western Eurasian world order, with Western Eurasia at the center. It reached its peak, arguably, somewhere around the early 20th century. Somewhere, arguably, between maybe, say, the 1890s, and I'm thinking here, maybe the 19 teens. In that corridor, you have the countries of Europe, which have emerged, and that's where our friend and brother Howard French is so powerful in synthesizing so much of the scholarship that has come before he published Born in Blackness. Those countries that we are familiar with now, that we still use names for, France, England, Germany, those countries we are familiar now with by name. Those countries, Portugal, Spain, Italy, they are at arguably their peak collectively. Spain and Portugal passed their peak by then. Their peak is probably the early 16th century. That's before the other people jump in and start snatching stuff from them. Maybe early 16th to early 17th century. Think about Gerald Horne's work. But somewhere around the 1880s and 90s, after the Berlin Conference of 1884 and 85, where Germany jumps in and asserts itself, but before Germany, to use Ebonics parlance, does the most, first doing too much, that would be World War I, then doing the most, that's World War II. Well, at that point, Europe, which is always fighting itself, as John Henry Clark would tell us, Europe kind of punches itself out. By the late 19th century, that is probably the peak of European expansion and authority, both in the sense of continental Europe, the countries of continental Europe, and the former colonies that those countries created in the Western Hemisphere that then separated from their colonial parents, like the United States, like Brazil, all those places. Mexico was in a little bit different category because they were never able to fully erase the Aboriginals. So they have a Mexican revolution to get rid of the Spanish, although the tongue of the Spanish is still in their mouths to this day. So it's kind of a different kind of arrangement, similar enough. But by the late 19th, early 20th centuries, and there are arguments to be made. I'm just kind of thinking about this out loud as you kind of led us into this conversation at this moment by thinking about this question of being one. That's about as close as we're going to get to the height of the power of the concept of Europe. But two things. Number one, it was never stable because everybody they rolled on always resisted. Sometimes the resistance breaks out. And it breaks out in terms of solidarity drawn from the culture of the people who are resisting. The Chinese, for example, British invasion, English invasion. And I love how Europe continues to try to project itself into the future and hold on to those kind of nostalgic moments of its greatest collective strength and power in the world by continuing to narrate itself at the center of all narratives, because each subsequent wave of them doing that, as the authority of Europe recedes, concedes more space to the perpetual resistance. Let me give an example. Every time now they make a remake of the colonial authority they projected forth, let's just take, as I said, the English in China, the British in China. The Netflix series that come out now have to concede more space to the Japanese, concede more space to the Chinese. Why? Because they aren't historically accurate reflections. What they are is attempts to backmap the present day circumstances. You can't push the Chinese and the Japanese around like you used to. So therefore, you remake the things you made in the 70s and 80s, and Shogun now looks different than Shogun in the 70s and 80s. Why? Because then, you weren't quite yet ready to accept the fact that they out from under your thumb, and they never were completely under your thumb. So anyway, back to what I was saying. The peak was probably the late 19th, early 20th centuries. Remember, the Japanese defeat the Russians in the 1890s. That's one of the things Gerald Horne writes about in his book, Race War, where he says, let me see, Race War. Where is Race War? I don't know where it is. It's up there somewhere. Where he talks about, it isn't a direct influence, but indirectly, you can make the metaphor when you hear James Weldon Johnson and James Rosemont Johnson put that line in Lift Every Voice and Sing, facing the rising sun. Japan's the land of the rising sun. Lift Every Voice and Sing is written during that period of Japanese ascension, this anti-colonial movement, and whether it be the starburst in the center of the Juneteenth flag above the horizon of the line there that separates the red and the blue, or whether it be James Weldon Johnson and James Rosemont Johnson, his brother, putting that line facing the rising sun. We know that Japan calls itself the land of the rising sun, and that they were able to push back on the Eurasians, in this case, the Russians. Sino-Russian War. I'm saying that to say that there's always been resistance. There was a peak of strength, and what we have seen, accelerated by the intra-European wars, not to say others weren't involved, like the Chinese, Japanese, and others, World War I, World War II. After World War II, not only can you not maintain the colonies that you never completely controlled, because nobody is ever completely under control of other people. There are moments of overt resistance, and there are moments of more silent resistance that always persist. Nobody likes to be dominated. Nobody likes to be rolled on. But after 1945, it accelerates. Between 1945 and 1960, so many of the former quote-unquote colonies take control of their lives, take control of the state apparatuses that were imposed upon them, the very thing that had those Africans from Barbados to Bermuda to Nigeria, to Burkina Faso, to Ghana, wearing white wigs. The cultural meaning making of England imposed on those British colonies. Well, the very thing that did that is weakening in terms of its authority. Now, it persists in a way because of imperialism, which Kwame Nkrumah, of course, writes about as the last stage of capitalism, in the sense that, well, actually, that's not true. Lenin calls imperialism the last stage of capitalism. Kwame Nkrumah says, a word, please. Why? Neocolonialism is the last stage of imperialism. So what Nkrumah said, we're not quite out from under the thumb yet, because the imperialists will now project that power that they had over us directly. They'll do it in a more networked form until we finally break them by resisting collectively. And at the end of World War II, in an attempt to maintain authority, but do it in a more concentrated form, and concede the fact that you can't push these people around like you could 100 years ago, or even 50 years ago, they form institutions, they being Europe and Europeans and their former colonies, form institutions that will enable them to continue this game a little while longer. That would, of course, be politically the United Nations. And that would, of course, be economically and financially the World Bank, the International Money Fund, the Bretton Woods institutions. And that allows them to continue to project. But even as they're projecting, that instability, that arrangement, that renegotiation is taking place. So politically, these countries that join the United Nations are countries that are controlled by an elite. To be sure, by an elite, I mean a small class of people, most of whom were trained outside of the countries, projecting continually this neo-colonial mentality of indigenous people. Suharto in Indonesia, Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana. Most compellingly, in most recent memory, and shout out to Marlon and everybody who organized the Nubia and Refill screening of Soundtrack to a Coup d'etat in Congo, Patrice Lumumba. Subsequently, in Burkina Faso, the great not Traoré, but Traoré's predecessor, who is often held up as the kind of standard, Thomas Sankara, who was killed. That group of leaders, Nandi Azikiwe in Nigeria, in the Caribbean, mainly in Jamaica, in some ways, Chetty Joggin in Guyana, with Walter Rodney pushing, and then he is assassinated. I mean, there are many, many others we can say. They are emerging in the 1950s and said, let's get together. Nasser in United Arab Republic, now Egypt. And they get together and say, we ain't got to pick between the Russians and the Americans. We're going to pick ourselves. We're going to self-determine on Friday, June 13th, 2025, the funeral mass and ritual for Charles Rangel there in New York. See Bill Clinton speaking at the funeral, this kind of thing. He likes speaking over the bodies of dead Black people, but their ancestors, now beyond his neoliberal gestures. But remember, Charles Rangel, the seat Charles Rangel held in Congress for many years was held before him by Adam Clayton Powell, who the United States sends to Bandung, Indonesia, to talk to these emerging African nations and emerging Asian nations and to say, hey, come with us, don't go with the Russians. And they looking like, we ain't going with neither one of y'all. Now we got a problem because the illusion of European control in the world, which at one time was joined with real power in the world, has begun to recede and ultimately will dissipate as countries begin to emerge out from under that. The resistance was always there. And what did they try to do in the 50s, in 1955 at Bandung? And actually, I have a beautiful, if I could find it quickly, I would pull it out, but I don't think I'll find it quickly. It's probably behind that row of books. Richard Wright, his book, Black Power, where he writes about Bandung. They're coming together. One, I love that. Coming together as one, as you say. That's the threat. And not just coming together as one, but coming together as one and picking themselves. Self-determination is the act. Okay, so now I'm going to come to where I was on Tuesday and bring all this is coming forward in a moment. In fact, let me just put this marker down and then come back to it. Because again, thinking about this question as we sit in Washington, D.C. with this big boy birthday parade of Donald John Trump. Parades. There have been parades of harm. But there are also parades of repair. When Gil Heron asked the question, who will pay reparations on my soul? The answer in short is we will pay reparations on our own soul. We will repair ourselves. You don't ask somebody else to repair your soul. Anyway, so as I was standing outside on 135th Street, actually on the Malcolm X side, and we were having conversation with these freedmen and ADOS Africans. Oh man, one young lady, and you all could see it on, I put the link there in the Mbangi here in Nubia, and on the YouTube side, you know, I'll do the same thing because I'll be in the participation. So if y'all watching this on the YouTube side, I'm here with you. So we'll do that. There was one young sister who came up, and all the testimony was recorded. It was quite a wonderful moment. I left very excited, very inspired, and I wasn't frustrated at all. In fact, there was. Let me just mention this to tie this together. After they interrupted me. And I was more than happy. See, we were on a clock. We were there. The formal, and listen, shout out to the commission. Shout out to Larry Daniel Favors, who read the enabling legislation to everyone there. It's on the record. You can see it for yourself. Commissioner Larry Daniel Favors, who just did a beautiful job, a brilliant job, a characteristically beautiful job. You know, that's how Larry rolls. And shout out to all the commissioners. Jennifer Jones Austin, who is an anti-poverty policy worker and an advocacy, brilliant advocate for the poor and works with nonprofits, also an attorney. Timothy Hogues.
And Reverend Bill Jones's daughter.
Yes, absolutely. Oh man, thank you, Prof. Yeah, I was going a little bit too fast. Absolutely. I mean, and you know, and now that you said, let me say that the commission is mostly women. Maybe that's important symbolically, but I will tell you it is absolutely essential substantively. These are powerful Black women. And by powerful, I don't mean just political power and outsized footprint in the world of policy making. Yeah, that's all true. No, I mean just you can, you know, even in the dialogue, the informal dialogue, you can see these are sisters who have seen some things and intervened in some ways. I did not know Timothy Hogues, who works in the Civil Service Commission in the state of New York. It was good to meet him and talk with him. Linda Brown Robinson, from the New York State NAACP. And again, behind the scenes, around the scenes, in front and back and on both sides, the great L. Joy Williams. Of course, when they signed the bill last year, we talked about that. We all went up and, you see L. Joy just doing it, including sending students to Howard. So L. Joy are the young charges I met that day that are now in their sophomore year at Howard. Thank you again for that. It was good to see the good brother Derek Hamilton, my friend and brother. Derek Hamilton, who is the chief economist for the AFL-CIO and professor at the New School. Derek Hamilton is an economist by training, just a brilliant brother. Linda Tarrant Reed, of course, who is a historian who's done some very important work, a lot of important work. Chanel Hawkins, Chair Hawkins, Dr. Hawkins is the chair, president, CEO of the Urban League of Rochester, out of the Rock. She was the chair. She was the one, and I love New Yorkers, because as the New Yorkers who were ADOS and FBA were on the mic talking out loud, the New Yorker who was chairing the meeting wasn't having it. So I'm sitting here enjoying this New York Africans, man. Nah, I would shut this meeting down. I'm like, oh boy, this is great. And then there was one brother who got on the mic and said, if y'all don't think that coming together is the one thing that will save us, if y'all don't come together, y'all bugging. I'm like, oh, he's matching the energy. I'm loving it. Sister Tanisha, a Nubian, of course, and we know Tanisha comes in and updates us all the time of how she's moving through the world. The sister who makes sure that folks have computers, young people have resources in New York. I got a chance to sit with her and talk for the first time face to face. We all see each other in office hours. We all see each other in Nubia. And so, of course, Dr. Ron Daniels, longtime liberationist and freedom fighter, head of the Institute of Black World 21st Century, Baba Ron. Dr. Deborah Jenkins is the co-chair. She is a minister, founding pastor of Faith Work Christian Church in Co-op City. She was the one sitting closest to the podium during the whole period. And then, of course, Larry Daniel Favors, of course, no stranger, a Nubian from the beginning, hosted Larry Daniel Favors show on Sirius XM and so many other things. And as well as, of course, the executive director of the Center for Law and Social Justice at Medgar Evers College. And she did what she does. She broke it down. She be breaking it down. So shout out to those commissioners. So as I said, there was one sister who came on the microphone and she was like, I ain't no African. We are not Africans. We are American. Don't call us that. They called us freedmen and we named ourselves foundational Black Americans. Oh, man, she had all the energy. And it's the kind of energy that if you absorb it without a place to channel it, you won't be a circuit. You will become the recipient in a way that will fracture you. Now, it could have easily sent me off the edge, but no, I want more. Give me all of it. Give me all of it. Because I'm circling it right back into you. You circle it right back into me, and we gonna come to some agreement. We stood out on the side for half an hour. And I had to get the train because I had to get back here. I got back to DC about 3 a.m. and then came here, cried, washed my face, prayed, got up and went on to the studio. So, but I'm happy about that because, I only mention it to say that I had to get off that street to get down to Moynihan to get on the train to come back here. Otherwise, I'd still be out there in this conversation because what that dialogue out of a spirit of generosity, that way of knowing of African people to say, we don't have to agree, but I suspect, in the words of Mariba Kelsey, that if we agree to agree, we're going to reach some point where you realize that we're saying the same thing. What was being articulated was the part that only we can repair. So when Gil Scott-Heron asks, who paid reparations on my soul? The answer is we have to repair ourselves. In fact, I said that in my remarks, and I'll put my remarks in Nubia. They're part of the record. And I'll post, actually, I'll figure out, I think I'll put it on the website. I rarely use that website. So I'll put it in Nubia. I'll put it on the website, that domain that I have that I rarely use, so people can download it wherever when they want to do it. It was, what I said was that the first act of repair is self-repair. The first act of repair is self-repair. In other words, you have to repair yourself. You can't expect other people, you don't even want other people to give you something that you give yourself, which is your self-awareness. And so I said that in my remarks, but as we stood there and I asked questions, what became apparent was much of the pushback from the Black nativists, and there's a range of Black nativists. They are the agents of chaos who will remain unnamed, because apparently if I say somebody's name as an example, they take some offense and then begin to try to take clips out and get clicks and likes. And that's not why we do this. So But there's a blackface nativist position that is really anti-immigrant. And when I say blackface nativist, I mean that it's a white nationalist position that is being articulated for a purpose other than black self-determination. It is an attempt to sneak a poison pill into solidarity politics. It is an anti-immigrant position. And the anti-immigrant position is wrapped in this idea that, you know, people say, we built this country. Absolutely true. The question is, why are you bringing it up? Are you bringing it up because you want compensation? That is a legitimate position, right? And as Gil Scott Heron says, many suggestions and documents written, many directions for the end that was given. You know, when we're together in Texas the next weekend, we're going to talk about a lot. Juneteenth, we're going to talk about a lot about Reconstruction. I'm very excited about that because it's requiring me to come and sit with Texas. Oh, the conversation we're going to have next week. I mean, we're going to sit and think about Texas as, in many ways, the defining place for what has happened up to now in America. Even as New York, I think, as I said, is not just the state. New York is, in many ways, the way to think about how we can go forward, as is California. New York and California together, which is why I think the reparations commissions there were so important. The California Commission and the New York Commission grapple with the question of what does it mean to put some of everybody in existence in one place and create a polity. George Washington's head has exploded every second of every minute of every hour of every day of every month of every year since he passed. Because in his wildest fantasies of domination, he could never have imagined California. The people you rolled on, the Indians, albeit different indigenous people than the ones you rolled on in the Ohio Valley and other places. The Asians, who you never imagined. The majority of people on the earth that you never saw with your own eyes, not at any critical mass. The Africans, who you did know through captivity, but didn't realize not only would we survive, we would ultimately shape the very culture that you sought out to create in this space. And not only that, we would, thank you very much, take your name and make it so black that if you were walking around today and said your name was George Washington, somebody give you a DNA test to figure out if some of us were your relatives. That's how black we've made your name. George Washington would lose his mind at the concept of California. I have no doubt. And for all the attempts to backmap where we are right now into the imagination of those enslavers, those fleeing felons, as the great Alton Maddox, and it was good to see my friend Roger Wareham, one of Alton Maddox's partners and comrades, the great Ray Wimbush, who testified as well on Tuesday, came up for Morgan State. It was good to see my brother, you know, because these are comrades of Alton Maddox who referred to these guys as not founding fathers, but fleeing felons. You're not my parents. But they would have lost their minds at the concept of California. And they would have lost their minds like Alexander Hamilton would lose his mind if he were walking around today in the very streets that he knew in the 18th century as New York, formerly New Amsterdam. And he went up into one of these houses and saw Lin-Manuel Miranda and the rest of them pretending that they're him, talking too fast for him to understand. And I apologize to the lady, the white signer, who, as I was reading my paper, had 20 minutes. She paused. She made me pause about 5 minutes in and say, "You're going too fast. I can't keep up." And so I slowed my pace a little bit to make sure that she could sign. And she was toggling back and forth with a young lady of African descent who didn't say that. Now I don't know. Maybe she couldn't either. But you know, looking at the tape, I'm thinking, "Oh, you're doing all right." Anyway, point is this: I don't think that Alexander Hamilton, if he went to see the play Hamilton, he couldn't keep up with the speech. It's too fast for him. But first thing he says, "Where are the white people?" No. And then he walk on the street of New York and be like, "What the hell? What happened here?" Yeah, those guys would lose their minds at the concept of America. California and New York alone are problematic. And I kind of agree with the now rehabilitated governor, at least on the way to rehabilitation, governor of California, Gavin Newsom, who a couple of short weeks ago was palling around with soft white nationalists, like hard white nationalists, for everybody from Joe Rogan and, you know, and what's the bow tie wearing guy, Hutch Kutch, whatever his name is. All of them trying to be friends. Tucker Carlson. Y'all know I'm playing, right, with these names, all these DEI names. But guess what? Donald Trump saved him. You become such a looming bozo figure that this man who was pounding around trying to sniff around the edges of your voters has now decided he's going to help lead the opposition and probably be justified and supported in court if we can trust the opinion that was handed down on Thursday by Justice Stephen Breyer's younger brother Charles in the San Francisco federal court, saying that y'all, in the words of the brother at the reparations public comment, you bugging, Donald. You can't just take over the National Guard. You don't have that authorization under the statute you're trying to use. And we ain't even got to the idea of making active duty military work in the domestic context, because you definitely can't do that. But we'll get there. I think Hamilton and Jefferson and all these guys, Washington, they would have lost their minds. Franklin said, what the hell just happened here? What happened here? Thomas Jefferson wouldn't even talk to Benjamin Banneker. So you know damn well he coming. What is this New York? What is New York? What is California? Oh my God. What is going on? All that is a backdrop to this. So the sister was like, ain't no African, and then person after person. And the thing that I found fascinating was, as they interrupted me, I absorbed that energy and I continued. And then I came back and sat down. The sister sitting right behind me was one of the freedmen, one of the ADOS people. She was the one who opened the heckling. And I looked at her and smiled, because I smiled from the podium. I'm good with y'all. I'm not tripping, because I know that's the pain. We're gonna pay reparations on your soul. Your soul can be repaired, because the thing that you're speaking out loud is your harm. Sister Alita on Monday Night Office Hours cautioned me about using the word trauma, and I had to think about that, and I'm still thinking about it, in fact. But clearly there's a harm. That harm we will repair for ourselves. But as we sat there, as the hour went on and turned into the second and third hour, the fourth hour was 4 to 8, we were talking, commenting as folk were commenting, not to overpower what was being spoken formally, but to kind of persist. And this sister behind me never stopped smiling. And I never stopped smiling. It wasn't no kiki fake smile. And then I realized some of y'all, this ADOS FBA freedmen, this is a game. And then I got tickled. And as I got tickled, I think it was contagious. They start laughing, and I realized, oh, so now I need some of the people who really deep into Africana ways of knowing to help me process that, because there is a sense of humor that speaks to being overwhelmed. You know, almost like we ain't never gonna get no reparations. This is a game, but we're gonna stop this. Then there were people who, first put it this way, I never got the sense, and I knew this, and Larry and I talked about this. And Eljoy, we were standing outside at the New York Historical Society after the bill signing last year. And one of the things I said there was, we were standing there just talking. This is long before there's a commission formed. This is long before there's any nominations. And I remember saying, you know, New York in many ways can be dispositive to this U.S. reparations conversation, because there's no way to reverse engineer the Pan-African nature of this polity. There's one of every African ever been in New York City alone, hell, in Brooklyn alone. So, I mean, to have it, you can't disaggregate a repair argument that argues for lineage without facing the fact that New York is impossible to reverse engineer the African nature of this polity. It's impossible everywhere, but New York is really a proxy for that. As I said, as I opened my remarks, and New York's not a state. John Clark called it a multi-ethnic nation. Now, that's true of the United States generally, but New York is a microcosm of that. And it raises a question, because New York in many ways is a preview of a potential America, not just a potential United States of America, but a potential of hemispheric America. From the north to the south, from the north to the South Pole, there's some of everybody in New York City alone. So it's a preview of what you would need to imagine a different globe. Because it ain't just Africans it's one of everybody in the world in New York, one way or the other. And so I remember saying to Larry and Eljoy, and then we stand there and say, you know, I think what's fascinating about the possibilities of reparations conversations in New York is that it will go beyond the idea of compensation. See, a lot of what the nativist conversation is about compensation, being paid for work rendered, but it doesn't get at the underlying relationship of governance formations, to use our African studies framework, to social structure formations. Who are we to each other? That's an internal conversation. That's a self-determination conversation. That is a repair conversation. And I was preceded in remarks by two professors at John Jay College, Ned Benton and Judy Lynn Peters, who are co-directors of the Northeast Slavery Records Index at John Jay College. This is a compendium of all the data that can be gleaned for who enslaved who in New York, what their names were, how many Africans they had captive, what were the names of those Africans if they're recoverable, what were the terms, circumstance, how much they paid for them, how long did they work them, where did they take them after that. I mean, it was fascinating to see, and they're just beginning this, and the records they showed were really remarkable, and they were followed by the sister who came right before me, Peggy King George. And I don't know if you know Peggy King George. I'm sure y'all will be in conversation if you haven't already. Peggy King George is she did some incredible work. She's the principal of a consulting group that she's formed called King George Cultural Projects. She worked in the Dinkins administration. She was the lead administrator that pulled together the groups and the people, the scholars, the builders, everyone, the designers of the monument that now rests in Lower Manhattan and is known collectively as the New York African Burial Ground. And she has traveled the world with this work of commemorating with monuments and looking at burial grounds and places where the bones of folks' ancestors rest. And she did a remarkable presentation. And so I was very happy to follow her, because one of the first things I did was thank her and her team for the work, because I said, for many years, the first group of students from Howard University to visit the New York African Burial Ground after the remains of those 419 Africans were reinterred in a powerful ritual we've talked about in class here. The first group of students to come to the New York African Burial Ground from Howard University, I led those students. They were my students in my Introduction to Africana Studies class. And after James Donaldson, the ancestor who was the dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, asked me to redesign the College of Arts and Sciences freshman seminar, first year seminar, we began taking all of the first year students to the New York African Burial Ground. And we did that for years until they took the seminar from me and freed me up to do the work I'm doing now. And I expect that we will continue. We've continued that ritual in some forms, but I'm freed up from that again. And as an older man now, I don't know if at one point we were taking 4 or 5 buses a weekend for a solid month, the month of October, every Saturday, 4 a.m. in front of Crampton Auditorium, the student center, and pack those buses with students. And we go up, stay all day, burial ground, take them to Harlem, let them loose to do what they want to do, get back on that bus, get back in the wee hours of Sunday morning. The next weekend, the same thing. The next weekend, the same thing. The next weekend, the same thing. I used to do that. We did it for years. And it wasn't a sacrifice. It's why you work at a historically Black college. That is the standard. If you come in and you ain't about that life, with all due respect, and you should probably find a job somewhere else. But as I said on Tuesday, the place we came to was there because of what Africans have done in that space to preserve it. The cosmogram in the floor of the New York African Burial Ground that Miss King George and her people were able to put together. And by the way, C.B. King is her father out of Georgia, the lawyer, the legendary civil rights lawyer who sacrificed so much for our people, her uncle. And I asked her this just before I went up. I said, "Is Preston King your uncle?" She said, "It's my uncle." Preston King, the incredible thinker, philosopher, just left Atlanta, was on campus of Morehouse College. His books are still sold there and taught there in classes. He spent time on faculty at Morehouse. That's their niece and father, respectively. So the cosmogram that's there in the floor that she and her comrades were able to get together to put in the floor at the New York African Burial Ground was made by Houston Conwell, an act of cultural meaning making and movement and memory. And of course, he is the artist who created, of course, the cosmogram under which lie the ashes of the physical remains of Langston Hughes, which is in the floor of the Schomburg that we walked across as we went into the auditorium where we did the testimony. All these things converge around this concept that you just said, Prof, of one. It is a parade of repair. And that first act of repair, as I said in my remarks on Tuesday, the act of self-repair is an act of self-determination. And all of the young people over the years, over the almost 15 years that we took buses in October, in September and October of every fall for our first year seminar, every one of those young people coming to that burial ground and learning how the institution that they now are part of, that has a name like George Washington's name, that has been so blacked up that Oliver Otis Howard would not recognize his name. It's so black now, just like George Washington would not recognize his name. Maybe Andrew Jackson would recognize his name, but he can't do nothing about it. My point is that was self-repair, self-determination. Who will pay reparations on our soul? We will. Come on, where we going? We're going to the place that carries your ancestors to talk about memory and how we are one, and how that oneness came as the Bambara and the Igbo and the Yoruba and the Efik and the Kikongo and the Bamana and all of the different groups, the Wolof and the Akan, how all those people were blended together, and you stuck a label on us from your social structure, the N-word, and we took that label, discarded it, and called ourselves something that we hadn't had to think of ourselves as before you rolled on us, and that was Africans. So to see a young lady say, I ain't no African, I'm a freedman, a foundational Black American, I understand the harm. I'm not mad at her. I'm not even mad at the system that diseducated her into that. I am resolved that we will heal ourselves. And so standing out there for over half an hour with the Foundation of Black American, the freedmen, ADOS labeled Africans, and being in conversation about them, one of the sisters said, "You were my daughter's teacher at Howard. You were my daughter's favorite student. I mean, you were my daughter's favorite professor." And I just laughed. I said, "No, that's not possible. How are we having this conversation?" She said, "Oh, you know." And you know what? What it reveals is we don't need to fight each other. Let's be generous. Let's have conversation. We will agree to agree, and then the places where we don't agree, I suspect, will be, if not eliminated completely, reduced to the point where we're not going to fight about little things. The things we might end up fighting on is, you know, what flavored ice cream do we like? Because in other words, we agree on so much, and so much of it is diseducation that we'll be able to figure this out. So, you know, like I said, I'll drop those remarks so everybody can see them. But let's be clear, reparations are not charity. They're investments in a better future, shaped by a more inclusive memory. They are not simply about what happened in the past. They're about remaking the systems of harm that continue today. So a lot of what's being argued about is restitution. How should that happen? So people say, cut the check, run the check. There's a lot of that on Tuesday. Okay, I understand that. But understand, as I kind of begin to move toward wrapping all these things up in a broad point, and then we'll stop for today, because it's a very fraught moment. As you heard Friday morning, Prof, on the radio, on Urban View Mornings, one of the brothers who is part of the broad brigade of transporters, the people who drive the trucks, the people who drive the transports, who are listening to Sirius all the time, who'll be listening to you in a minute, Prof. He said, you know, I was at the gas station as the truck stopped talking with these military guys headed to DC. What you doing? And the bro started cussing. He in a uniform. I got to go up to this MF. And ain't nobody trying to waste their time on that. And the brother said, this is the military guy, the Army cat. He said, I'm supposed to take my family to Disneyland this weekend. Now I got to be up here. Oh, man. Yeah. Understand, them uniforms are masking the reality. The uniforms are the social structure. Inside is the governance formation, who we are to each other. We know who that is. And it ain't just black and brown people. It ain't just white people. It's a lot of people whose weekend was inconvenienced because they had come up here to a birthday bash by a man who is breaking the law and certainly breaking the protocol. The United States military is supposed to be apolitical. We know they're not, but they're supposed to be apolitical, even as they are used very much politically as a weapon in the world. They're supposed to be apolitical. So when Donald Trump uses military installments and military rituals and formations as backdrops for his political campaign, for his political theater, which is what he has done, he is violating protocol and quite possibly the law, whatever that means. But this brother who was speaking to the brother who called in on Friday morning, he was upset, messed up, because he's in the National Guard. Everybody here who's in the National Guard know how this works. You're not in this all the time, every time. You're certainly not going to shoot nobody. The feds are coming in, and who knows where that's going to end up. So as the world burns, the cold Civil War we've talked about so very often in class in these sessions, that is now continuing to be compiled in the compendium The Cold Civil War is heating up once again. It's part of a global Cold Civil War. So this birthday parade, this parade is a parade of perpetual harm against our sensibilities. It offends us, certainly. It shouldn't disquiet us to the point of inaction, but understand that the pushback is there as well. Charles Breyer ruling against the Trump administration in Newsom versus Trump, which is the case. Y'all can download it, 36 pages. You can read Judge Breyer's ruling, which of course was paused. He granted a temporary restraining order. The state of California said, stop Trump from using the National Guard, return the power back to the governor. Breyer agreed in very strong language, going even beyond that request to get to the substantive issues underneath it. Oh, he minced no words. I would encourage people to read it. Maybe we'll talk more about it on Monday night in office hours. But of course, the Ninth Circuit, sitting in a 3-judge panel, reversed that pause. So the Trump administration still has control of the National Guard in California. I expect that ultimately when they sit en banc, when the whole Ninth Circuit rules, the ruling will be different. We'll see. They're going to hear arguments on Tuesday. So if you're watching this later in the week, you'll already know the answer to this. We all will. And then, of course, like everything else, they're going to go to the Supreme Court. And we know that Thomas and Alito, who have been thoroughly compromised, they have nothing to do with the law and everything to do with their warped ideologies, are going to do whatever Trump then want to do. In this case, give him control of all the National Guard. Because remember, the order that he wants to federalize the National Guard in California wouldn't just apply to California. It would apply to a National Guard near you. We already see at the state level, Louisiana and Missouri have already anticipated what the white nationalists wanted to do in Washington. So they've already said, we're going to pull out our National Guard to try to intimidate people who are coming for the thousands of No More Kings gatherings. The sheriff of Mobile, Alabama, is now bragging about how if anybody touches the barriers or the barricades the police set up and try to shove them or whatever, they're going to break hands. And he says all the emergency rooms going to be filled with people with broken hands. He's a remarkably robust, outdated, past his prime white nationalist. Certainly an ideological kinsman of Bull Connor and those, but he's going to find out the world that he thinks he lives in isn't the world he in fact lives in. But as the world burns domestically, as the world continues to burn internationally, as you mentioned Israel, of course, taking out folks in Iran and bragging about it, that reparations meeting that we had was an opportunity to think about what reparations means, not just in a long view of history, but in the living now. What does recovering memory, the act of self-repair, a parade of repair, what can that do? And what does the demand do? The demand for restitution, which is demand that's legitimate whether you ever get it or not, because you've made it from a place of subject control, self-determination. Whether they pay you or not, they do owe you. And it's not an expectation that they are moral in what they are doing, or they're going to somehow see the light. It's a matter of negotiating from strength, which is why I stand out there on Malcolm X Boulevard in front of the Schomburg with the ADOS and the FBA and the Freedmen. My basic question was, and I asked them this, when have Africans in the United States of America ever achieved a collective victory that wasn't tied to international politics and to the fate of African people globally? They couldn't give me one example because there isn't one. Everything that African people have achieved collectively in this country, in the United States of America, relative to policy changes that affected everyone, to statutory changes, whether it be the Civil War amendments or certainly during the so-called Second Reconstruction, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, everything, whether it be the so-called integration of the military by Harry Truman in 1948 to the Civil Rights Act of 1957, all of it was because the United States could not afford to continue its politics as usual in a world in which the world was now coming out from under the grip of the age of Europe. They couldn't afford to do it, certainly not with so many non-whites here in the United States of America who were related to those people there. And that was in the 1950s and 60s. Now it's only gotten worse because demography is what's going to wipe out the concept of whiteness numerically in the United States. The United States is looking much more like the world. Footnote, all the people who tell your children you should not be going to HBCUs, you got to go somewhere where they'll prepare you for the real world. The real world is 9/10 non-white. And guess what? The United States every day looks more and more like the real world. Stop lying to your children. You shouldn't have done it then. You certainly shouldn't do it now. So standing there in the corner, I'm asking them, when have we ever made advancements collectively in the United States when it wasn't tied to the fates of other people elsewhere? And as you said, as you led us into the conversation today, Prof, When we have articulated that solidarity, has it not driven the social structure of this country toward us in a weakened state so that we can renegotiate the terms? The answer is never. Now, in the first waves of this, the 1950s and 60s, the concessions were made in a way that engendered a kind of elite, so-called elite, upper class of blacks. In that class, many black people in that class propelled there because of our hard work, our sacrifice, our efforts, but also propelled there in part because that's the easiest concession to make in a capitalist society where you don't want to give everybody rights. So you try to create a manager class that will manage the rest of these people's expectations. It's not just the United States. There's a global bourgeoisie that does that. Charlie Carr writing about it in Black World in the 1970s as the SNCC folk went to Tanzania and said, oh, you got some petty bourgeois Negroes here that are like the ones in Washington, D.C. Absolutely. You create a manager class. Now, some of them are going to betray your investment in them to manage everybody else. That's going to be the Nkrumahs. That's certainly going to be the Patrice Lumumbas. When you read his book, Congo, My Country, he's much more conciliatory in that book, even as he articulates a vision. But you force Patrice Lumumba not to be conciliatory and to be confrontational. He didn't get a chance to go to school. He is part of that class in Portugal who could probably fit in this room in the 1950s and early 1960s, the évolués. These are the Negroes you kind of cultivate to manage the country while you continue to rob them blind, the country blind. Well, that was the first wave of concessions, as Gerald Horne writes about. And then you got Brenda Gale Plummer writing about this. There's so many people. Mary Dudziak in her book on what she calls Eyes Off the Prize. You give some concessions. Now you can eat anywhere you want in the restaurant, sit anywhere you want in the train. But those concessions benefit that small group that you're cultivating. As Gerald says, basically, you've given them some concessions, almost like a truce to help engender a truce with everybody else. But now we're in a wave where that's not going to be enough. These are the people who are often in the class. A sister who testified on Tuesday said, all of y'all, the Urban League, the NAACP, and then she started calling out commissioners. I know you, all y'all legacy institutions, y'all sellouts, y'all traitors. Oh, some of that energy is coming from the perception that everybody populating those organizations hasn't done enough for the Black community, without considering that the social structure will give some concessions that won't benefit everyone, but will alienate many people in that class from the masses of the people who are looking like, I don't care about none of y'all. It's the same energy that says, why vote? They all the same. Now, if you watched any of the House Oversight Committee meetings this week with the DEI chair, and the only diversity, equity, and inclusion in this country, the strongest and most consistent is whiteness. Because if James Comer from Kentucky was congressperson from Kentucky was a black man, he would not be in that position. But he's a DEI hire. He's white. He's a white male, so he doesn't have to be competent in the federal legislature. Same for Jordan out of Ohio or Taylor Greene out of Georgia. Their whiteness is their qualification in a white nationalist polity. Well, if you think for a minute that Comer and Taylor Greene are the same as Maxwell Faust out of Florida or Jasmine Crockett out of Texas or the great Summer Lee out of Western Pennsylvania, you've lost your mind. But understand the energy, because they collectively you would see as part of the petty bourgeois, and you think they betrayed you. No, that's how that system made concessions the last time y'all tried to get together. And they have counterparts around the world. The elected officials from Tinubu on down in Nigeria. The elected officials everywhere are part of a social class. Now, you can commit class suicide. You can say, I'm not going to do this to my people, and I'm going to engender a different politics, whether it be Amilcar Cabral in Burkina Faso, whether it be Julius Nyerere in Tanzania in the 1960s. Cabral is killed. Nyerere lives to die of old age. He gives up power. Whether it be somebody between a Cabral and a Nyerere, like maybe Nelson Mandela in South Africa, or whether it be a young man like Ibrahim Traoré in Burkina Faso, who would be committing what some people from that period, Frantz Fanon might say, class suicide. Certainly Cabral, when you read Return to the Source, you're committing class suicide. In other words, you're turning your back on what you could do if you would just simply play nice. You have a nice house, you can give some funky speeches at school, but just keep these Negroes in line. Traoré is like, nah, we all come together. Give me my gold, give me all the rent. Hey, Niger, don't you take all the uranium back. Go tell the French to go to hell. They be cold in the wintertime because they nuclear power plants run for you. You don't give us a fair price. Oh, this is a problem. You think Israel bombing Iran is the end? No, because the uranium don't come from Iran. It don't come from Israel. It don't come from the United States. This West African thing is a problem, and it ain't just West Africa. The Sahel states stretch from the Atlantic, where Burkina Faso is, all the way across Africa to East Africa, to the Red Sea, to the Indian Ocean. This is a problem. And if you think for a minute that they're going to continue to tolerate this without eventually getting physical with it, you don't understand two things. Number one, the depravity of a dying colonialism, to quote Frantz Fanon, the title of his book, A Dying Colonialism. And number two, you don't understand our own strength, because when we come together as one, it makes it much more difficult for them to do what they think they're going to do over there to them, because now we're part of it, and it makes it impossible for this system to continue to do to us what it has always tried to do, because they're with us, which is the point I was making standing there on 135th and Malcolm X Avenue. The thing you say you want becomes possible, even likely, through solidarity. You're in New York City. You ain't got to go to Ghana. They'll go to Ghanaian right there. You ain't got to go to Nigeria and Jamaica. There they go right there. They are us. We are them. And when they show up at the UN and say, you're going to get your hands off of our people in Harlem, and you're going to put healthcare down, and you're going to stop with this foolishness of saying people don't have housing or a livable wage, or the same factories that produce the stuff that you're using now, we're going to shut them down because we're the ones with the minerals. And oh, this is a problem. And they sitting there, yeah, now that's true. And then the other stuff comes out. And what comes out is the pain. Yeah, but we've been wrong. Everybody gets something but us. These are, okay, let's start with the everybody gets something. Who getting something? They come here. Who is they? Why did they come here? And how, you who are descended from captives, how did you get to New York? Because the last I checked, migration is the central theme in human history, and you came from Georgia. They just came a few miles farther than that. But you all came here, and you came here because you love the New York weather in December, right? No. You came here because you were pushed from where you were, and that's part of the global forces. And then we continue to talk, because again, people talking about they want reparations and it should be restricted only to the people who went through captivity in New York City, some of them. I say, that's a flawed logic, because you didn't go through captivity in New York City. You went through captivity in Virginia. Do you get reparations? Because you only been here 2 generations. Oh, you better be careful. And of course, as Lurie explained to everyone, y'all can watch the tape. I think it's a great exercise in getting our minds around what's really being talked about today. Lurie explained the remedies aren't limited to lineage. They aren't limited to race, as I tried to explain in my remarks, and they interrupted me, and I thought it was cool because I enjoyed it, and I was entering the remarks in the record, which means y'all not listening. Y'all came here to disrupt. I see y'all laughing. I'm sitting here laughing with y'all, which means I know what y'all doing. And plus the young brother got up and said, y'all bugging. And then two young people got up. This one young sister who just graduated from Georgetown, who applied to Howard Law. And she was telling me about what they were doing. They're in New York, and they both testified near the end. So if you go near to hour 4, near the end, you'll see these 2 young people stand up. And they said, I loved how, and I told her afterwards, I said, I loved how you did that. She said, this lineage and race, I don't care about that. What I'm saying is, that's the energy. She went right on to the point. The question of repair must be structural. Why would you want somebody else not to have housing as long as you have housing? You don't. You want them to have housing too. You just don't want them in the line in front of you. But guess what? What if there was no line? What if there's structural repair that addresses everyone's needs? Would you be for that? And at that point, some of the folks start saying, this is the foundation of Black American freedom. Said, yeah, I'm not against that. But what I'm saying is, okay, so now you're not against that principally. That's that Africana ways of knowing showing through. I know you don't want to call yourself an African. That's fine. That's why I said ways of knowing instead of epistemology or philosophy, because I know those words would put off people who would then assume that I'm a petty bourgeois professor, which technically in terms of social class I am. But in terms of who I am as an African, has no bearing upon the conversation we have. So I know that would turn you off, as would the idea that in a limited resource environment, you worried about somebody getting something when there's not enough to go around. But guess what? There is enough to go around. And guess how you get to enough to go around? Solidarity, being one, not separating. Because as long as you separate, the group that presents as being separated, markets that talk to each other all the time. That's why there's the United Nations that said that Iran is in compliance, but then the United States wants to pull out. And that's why when they introduced the resolution this week at the United Nations, which basically set the stage for we ain't involved, whatever, going into Iran, The United States put it up there, the Europeans backed them, and the most of the people in the world are against it. But guess what? You set up the UN so you could manage to try to persist a little bit longer. But if you're standing on the corner of 135th and Malcolm X saying you want something because you're afraid that somebody else is going to get it and there's not enough to go around, you don't understand. Just like those Africans who stormed the United Nations, Maya Angelou, Carlos Moore, Rosa Guy, those Africans who stormed the United Nations after the assassination of Patrice Lumumba, as is shown in the film Soundtrack to a Coup d'etat, that the solidarity will be the way that you get what you want. And that the stronger your solidarity is, the more possibility that you can remake the entire system, which is why I stood there in New York and said, let me be very clear about what New York represents in this reparations conversation. I said, it's precisely because of the complexity of New York. It is precisely because of the inclusiveness of the populations that populate the state of New York and New York City. And it is absolutely essential to understand that the refusal to surrender to limiting possibilities, to nativist logics, to separate logics, it is precisely because of that that New York must lead, not lag, the reparations movement. They shouldn't be thinking about that in the same way. So let me kind of wrap this up. The question of repair is a moment to allow us to think about how to decolonize the modern world. We've been after that since people rolled on us and created an us. Again, Howard French, Born in Blackness. We've been after that and achieving serial victories, which if we step back, we will see the victories. We'll see the setbacks, but we'll also see the victories. Shout out to Doechii, Swan Princess, for standing at the BET Awards and bringing up self-determination, bringing up Gaza, saying that all these things must end. And the beautiful thing about it is, protest and standing is not an act of losing fear. It's an act of moving in spite of fear. And as I heard the breath in that young sister's voice catch, realizing that ain't on the teleprompter, I said, you know what? I ain't mad at her. That's a beautiful moment. You're stepping into a tradition, sis. That is tradition. We're going to set aside the lyrics because you're young and you're mature, and some of that stuff's going to come naturally. Not talking about that. I'm talking about your spirit. I'm talking about your Africanness. I'm talking about the fact that if Nina Simone was standing there, she'd have said the same thing. You're in that now. And it's a beautiful thing about, and you're exactly right. The Nile is a river. We're going to be standing on it. And one day you're going to make a video where you say that, and you ain't going to be denial is a river. It's going to say the Nile is a river. And I fully expect that out of you. You're too gifted. And at that moment, you're articulating to folk that you have that consciousness that will lead you there. It's a very important moment. It's a moment to rethink not only how to get restitution out of the United States, which may or may not ever happen, but to decolonize modernity, as the new ancestor Ngugi wa Thiong'o would say. The ADOS position, which we discussed amicably, as the more we discuss, the more the conversation turned into one of community. Now, I ain't gonna say that it turned completely into that, because number one, we didn't have enough time. Number two, you know, there are gonna be some hardcore positions that will emerge that some of the people in those formations will look and say, now, wait a minute, oh, I see, you in here for something else. Who's paying you? Anyway, I started sounding like the months. I don't want to do that. But somebody is, clearly, there's some paid agents of chaos in this. Who shall remain nameless, because again, you know, no need to give people content that they can chop up and misrepresent. I understand I've even been called intellectually dishonest, but you know, that's cool. Listen, I got room for all of it. It's baby smoke anyway, and let us agree to agree. And if you think I've been misrepresenting you, then you should go chapter and verse. I think I can show you something different. But you know, in this moment of cascading global crises and domestic reckonings, that moment we had in New York really allowed us to think about possibilities. Resistance is rising. You know, this resistance is everywhere. Standing there in the Schomburg on Tuesday, thinking about these parades of harm, this full spectrum assault on our senses that we're seeing, how they can obscure the fact that we have parades of repair, and that these parades of harm will often irritate people who would otherwise remain kind of inactive or passive into action, because the No More Kings thing is only going to grow. The absurdity of Stephen Miller and the absurdity of Stephen Bannon, The absurdity of Russell Vogt and Kevin Roberts at Project 2025 and the Heritage Foundation, and now in the federal government. The absurdity of Elon Musk, who realizes he overreached and can never repair his brand, even as he will continue to suck up by the billions our tax dollars in the United States, because the United States military is too invested in the weapons systems that he has developed to ensure his continuing profit. Even as they overplay their hand, what will emerge, as Jonathan Shell wrote many years ago in his book, The Unconquerable World. He says the two most powerful forces in the world are nuclear weapons physically and the people of the world. And guess what? The people of the world have always persisted. I'll stop with this right here, because it's been a while since I showed a book. Gloria Brown Marshall, Professor Brown Marshall, who's also at John Jay College, has just released a book, and Roland reminded me the other night, Martin, we were on, and he said he was in Memphis speaking at a Juneteenth celebration this week. And he said a young lady came and put this book in his hand. It's called A Protest History of the United States, Gloria Brown Marshall. This Professor Brown Marshall, lawyer, she's at John Jay College, professor of constitutional law and Africana studies at John Jay. He put this book in her hand and said, "Get this book to Dr. Carr." And I asked him, I said, "Did Professor Brown Marshall sign the book?" And he said, no, the young lady gave me the book and wanted me to give this book to you. I said, "Do you have a copy?" "You can keep that copy." "Why?" "Because I got a copy." Come on, man. That's what I do. And the reason I raise it is because this is an excellent book to talk about the fact that we resist. It's called A Protest History of the United States. Every chapter grappling with the idea that while you think you're in charge, Donald Trump, you think you're in charge, doggone Christy Nome, with the store-bought hair stapled on the inside of your baseball cap so you can easily take it off, put it back on. You think you're in charge. Marjorie Taylor Greene and James Comer on the House Oversight Committee, and Jasmine Crockett running to be the leader of the minority on that committee. And in another year and a half, if we get out and do our thing, she could be the actual chair of that committee. So you ain't got to worry about James Comer being completely overmatched intellectually when Taylor Greene attacks her eyelashes and then she turns around and says, "Mr. Chair, point of inquiry." So if I were to say bleach blonde, bad built butch body, would that be struck for the record? And he says, "Oh, yeah, you stupid." You see how she snuck it in? And then, of course, they remix it, culture meaning making it becomes a song. In this book, what Gloria Brown Marshall chronicles in the United States is that there has always been a history of what the social structure would call protest or resistance, which I would call, out of the governance formation, self-determination. We've always self-determined, whether it be Chapter 2, What to the Slave is the 4th of July. Chapter 3, Labor Rights and Union Strikes. Chapter 4, Anti-War Marches. Chapter 5, Rebellions in the 20th Century. Chapter 6, Her Body, Her Ballot, Her Protest. Chapter 7, Protesting Violent Policing. Or Chapter 8, Contesting Climate Denial and Environmental Racism. What is clear is that we have always persisted in our resistance, and we are at the verge of a structural transformation as the age of Europe reaches its death knell. I know it don't feel like that, but we have to put it in context. Prof, come on back. We'll get out of here. I know you got a show in a minute, and I know we'll be in Texas next week. We interviewed Ed Cotham Jr., who wrote this book, Juneteenth, the one we talked about a lot. This is the white dude, the military historian who walked Lamont and I, and this will be released on Sirius on Thursday while we're in Texas, through the history of Juneteenth. We talked to Frank Smith a long time, but I am very excited because this is the brother I asked him about first of all, and you have secured for us, so we get to come with Sam Collins. Very excited about that.
Well, you know, this space that we're in is a making of everybody participating. So Sam Collins actually reached out to me, and I'm very grateful, you know, that goodness is just coming.
Yes.
Goodness is just coming. I love it. I love it. But it also says we leave space for it, right? So we're broadening the tent so that people can come in and show their light.
That's right. You know, I should mention this. Like I said before, Michel Foucault, the French philosopher, would say this at the Collège de France. He said, you know, after you give a talk or you're in conversation, you leave and you think. He said it would have been one or two things to put things exactly right. This conversation, what you just said, reminds me, and this puts it exactly right. I got off the train. I'm headed to the Schomburg, but I couldn't resist. I had to go to get my comic books. Wednesday's comic book day. The last place I saw Greg Tate was right outside Madison Square Garden, across from Midtown Comics. Let me go get my comics. I'm up there getting Black Panther, and I hear, "Dr. Carr." I look around, Nubians. Let me just say, I'm just saying, because I thought, oh, tell Karen, everybody. In fact, I got a book from you for you. I'm gonna bring it in my bag. Last week, after we finished in class, I went over to Ebony Gallery where Larry and Olabisi debuted their book. This is the little book, The History of Hope in the Making, The Legacy of African Americans in Dayton, Ohio. This one's for you. I'm bringing it to you. But while I was there, my man Bing Davis, Willard Bing Davis, one of the greatest artists of his time, a leader of the Black arts movement. He and his partner have the Ebony Gallery. They did a special edition of a book you can't purchase. University of Dayton. He said, get this book to Karen. I said, okay. So I'm going to bring that to you as well. I mean, this is a man who was at the center of the Black arts movement. He's still a living force in Dayton and the world. He wanted you to have his book. So you're absolutely right. The goodness is coming. No, thank you. And thank you for reminding me to thank you on behalf of them and a lot more other people who told me to tell you.
Listen, I can't tell you how grateful I am. There's so much that I don't know, but every day I get to know more because of you. So
same here. Same here. We pray for everybody coming down here. Hey, look, what do you think? I should ask you. I know you can read. What about the technique at these No More King protests? They want to provoke things. The whole idea of sitting down, what do you think about that? Like if something happens and everybody should just drop? I don't even know if that's a fair question to ask.
Yeah, I don't know how this is going to play out either. So
Neither do I.
I'm kind of like holding my breath.
Me too.
Because I want everyone to be okay. I saw a horse trample somebody today. I was like,
Lord have mercy. Lord have mercy. It's gonna be tough.
It's the lack of care for human beings. Like
that's right.
I played Kennedy's speech.
Yeah.
The day before, and I didn't put two and two together. We've talked a lot about Medgar Evers, but I didn't realize that the day before Kennedy delivered this speech that basically made Americans look at themselves. And I played it. It's a 30-minute speech. I played a couple of minutes of it. The next day, Medgar Evers was shot.
That's right.
In November, Kennedy was shot.
That's right.
And it made me think how violent it feels for people to have to confront their own lack of character and humanity, that they rather kill somebody than to change. And that's what has me concerned. You rather get rid of the irritant than to actually confront your own lack of humanity. You rather kill somebody than to, and it speaks to the smallness that I don't know what we do about, Dr. Carr, that people are so small that instead of building themselves, they rather crush everyone around them so that they can feel like something.
We stay focused. We do what we're doing. And history tells us when we do that, we set the course. And we just have to keep doing it. You just have to keep doing it.
Thanks.
Love you. You got to do the thing.
Yeah.
See you all Monday night in office hours or over the weekend. And I got to figure out how I'm going to pack these books because next week, oh man.
Ship them. That's what I shipped a bunch of stuff.
I'm scared. I don't like putting that in the mail because it's out of my sight. I'm one of them Negroes that need it. Anyway, let me stop.
Do what you do. All right.
Yeah, love you.
I see you. Love you too. All right. Bye, Dr. Carr. Bye, everyone.